Hi, my name is Sandra Quincoses. I also go by Dr. Q because my last name is a little complicated to pronounce. And I'm here today to discuss with you a case study that we looked into where we unmasked a very influential Twitter account trying to influence elections in another country, and how the digital actor behind that particular account was linked to another government. So, just a little bit about myself. In brief, I have about 10 years open source intelligence experience, so OSINT. I'm also a professor at Florida International University. I teach in their intelligence fellowship program, and I have a PhD in social psychology. I have a public and private sector experience doing OSINT work, and it all started I started my career as a social media intelligence analyst in 2014. And back then, the problem set was ISIS accounts on social media. So I would look at threat actors online, and that was one of the most influential, high impactful digital campaigns, and it caught everybody by surprise. But of course, actors learn from each other, so it's evolved a lot since then. But that was the first time that we really saw the impact of the impact of social media activism and information operations. So today's presentation, just in brief, I'm going to quickly define disinformation. It's relevant to our case study. The geopolitical setting, I'm going to take you all the way to South America. And it's a region that's often overlooked in the news and global news. So it's particularly important for our case study because this digital actor was able to operate for long periods of time because really there are very few eyes on that area of the world. How we discovered this account, content analysis, so the behavior, and how we attributed it, and it revealed motivation, obviously, and the impact. And our report was published in March 2022, and the digital actors did alter their behavior as well as a result of that. So I'll walk you through our story now. Okay, so disinformation. A lot of people confuse it with misinformation, and what's important to note about disinformation is that it is purposefully put out to mislead the public. It's super disrespectful. I hate it. I'm sure a lot of people hate it. And misinformation is basically the same thing without the intent, just people spreading information that can be perceived incorrectly, or just false information, just spreading it without knowing. And then there's malinformation, which is a separate thing. But for the sake of this case study, we're going to look at disinformation. And I highlighted deliberate and intentional because you don't know the purpose or intention without knowing the source of your information. So that is super important. We often look at disinformation through the content that's put out, a content analysis, but that's always in response to something that's already occurred. So if you really want to come in front of something, of an information operation, it's important to know your source. And it's worth noting for this presentation in particular that disinformation thrives during political unrest. I'm sure many of you already know that, but it's worth pointing out because society is vulnerable during these times. So intention, once we know the who, it's easier to understand the why and come in front of something. So this is shaky. So this is Chalecos Amarillo. This is a digital account. This is a Twitter account that we came across. I'm going to refer to it as Chalecos from here on forward. It is suspended now from Twitter, but at the time, it was able to operate from December 2018 until March 2022. It's a Spanish-speaking account. And you could see several interesting little characteristics here. Clovers for Assange is one of the hashtags it uses in its bio, so automatically one can assume it's not going to be very friendly towards the US or its allies in terms of content. And it also associates itself with the Yellow Vest movement. That's what Chalecos Amarillos means in Spanish. So it used a movement from Europe, basically, and tried to rebrand it around their own interests. And so we're going to talk about this account, just that it was worth an introduction up front. So really quickly, and if you want more details about the geopolitical situation in Latin America, please feel free to ping me after this brief. But Why Colombia, basically, is the question here. It is the closest South American ally to the United States. I don't know if many of you have seen Narcos on Netflix, but we have a lot of security cooperation with them to tackle drug-related issues. Colombia is one of the main producers, the producer really, of cocaine in the world. So it's a very important issue that we have partnerships. I mean, we, the United States, have partnerships with Colombia. And this picture, by the way, is just an example of the military, both the US and Colombian military, doing different exercises together. And one other thing the United States and Colombia have done, besides cooperate with in security issues, is Colombia's basically been on the US side when it comes to political lineage. So if the US expresses concern about regional adversaries like Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua, usually Colombia would echo that. And I'm going to put in bold every time Venezuela comes up, right, when we're looking at the geopolitical situation, because this is what led us to the hypothesis about who might be behind this account. So what about this account really stood out to us? Well, it was tweeting a lot about an opposition political candidate, the leftist candidate for the Colombian elections that took place this year in May 2022. And it was in favor of a gentleman named Gustavo Petro. And he is the president-elect. Well, now he was inaugurated this week, actually. And he is the first leftist president in Colombia. And he has a lot of views about what has traditionally been foreign policy with the United States. He has his own views that would alter what has traditionally been. He's also a former senator, former militant with M19. It was a militant group that's no longer active in Colombia. He's friends with the FARC, another a regional militant group in Colombia that is now a political party. And one key thing to note, too, is that back in the day, he was friends with the late Fidel Castro of Cuba and Hugo Chavez. Venezuela, there we go again. And that is him with Hugo Chavez. So Petro's stance towards the US, I mentioned some challenges that would come up from this new administration. Challenges meaning that, you know, we had, the United States had a consistent policy with Colombia, and now this might alter it a bit. So he's critical of US economic sanctions. That's been the foreign policy direction in the region. He does not favor anti-narcotics agenda. Oh, DEA, sorry about that. That might be a challenge. Critical of extradition of criminals. And key, he promotes the rebuilding of diplomatic relations between the US and Venezuela. There are crippling economic sanctions on Venezuela right now. So who else wins if Petro wins? Venezuela. This is just a quick recap of the region right now in terms of its leadership. So the majority of the region is leftist leaning, which is, you know, fine. But Latin America does have this funny thing it does that it's like a windshield wiper. It goes really, really left, and then next time it goes really, really right, and then it just keeps doing this. Well, Colombia hasn't really been victim to that windshield wiper situation, and neither have the states that think tanks consider to be leftist dictatorships. So this is the first time we really see Colombia be involved in this phenomenon. So really quick, I'm not going to go into details. This is basically what I'm going to walk you through. We were working on a project looking at human rights violations on a global scale. I'm a Spanish speaker, so my team was looking at Latin America, and we, you know, saw that there was a lot of social media activity around Colombia protests in May 2021, and this mysterious account with no identifiable information was really influential in the discussions, but it didn't say whether it was in Colombia, where it was, who it is. It was just inauthentic behavior to the max. It echoed also US adversaries. So, I mean, Clovers for Assange, it's not surprising. So, and these include Russian state-sponsored media, Iranian state-sponsored media, Cuban, and Venezuela. So, our hypothesis was that the Venezuelan government is attempting to influence perceptions in Colombia with the goal of achieving political change in getting Petro elected. And the result of our research was that the Venezuelan government likely, used a third-party firm to conduct and engage in I.O. to include disinformation to help get Petro elected. Why? We believe is because it helps soften U.S. foreign policy towards it. So this is the network that we're going to look at today. I'm going to walk you through this, and this is a very simplified. There are a lot more actors here, but pretend this is like a mall directory and you are here. So we already covered Chaleco Samaril and his little sub-networks. And yeah, let's go on with the show here. Discovery. So we were looking at these human rights violations, and all of a sudden we see this account. We did a content analysis on this account and saw how many other Twitter accounts were retweeting Chalecos, and found that it reached at least 8,000 retweets within 2 days during anti-government protests in Colombia. And these are just Twitter accounts that actually have a geolocation or some sort of geo-reference to it, which is not the majority of Twitter users. So one can imagine the true numbers of this, right? And here's an example of how it was actually utilizing trending hashtags related to the protests to influence the narrative. It called the administration at the time a narco-dictatorship, and it used SOS, Colombia, they're killing us. That was very common among protesters and digital activists. So again, just going over quickly this account up front, we see it's labels itself as a community, it has a high following, created in December 2018. That's a long time ago in social media world. So there was no identifiable information, large following, interacted with the community. So it was not a bot, which means there was true effort behind it. Okay, because it takes a lot more for a person, an operator, to be behind an account than to automate posts and just retweet. It went out of its way to interact with the community, and it echoed Venezuelan, I didn't put it in bold, my bad, but Venezuelan and allied state-sponsored news. And it interacted with suspicious accounts, which I'll walk you through, active 22 hours a day on average, and we believe that's because there were several operators behind this account, because that's not humanly possible unless it's really not. And then one interesting thing is that it posted true, half-true, and false information. And that's super important to point out, because if you post even a small percentage of false information, but the majority is true, that means you gain trust from your audience, and when you put out that false information, they will believe you, because you've established that relationship and that trust. And then another key thing was that it adopted domestic hashtags in target countries. In Colombia, one thing I did not mention earlier that is worth noting, I'm using Colombia as a case study, but this account, basically, whenever there was political unrest in the region, it would focus on that and try to get the leftist politician elected. And there were a lot of, since 2018, there have been several political presidential elections in the region, and we all saw how that looked a few slides ago. So it's been very influential in framing narratives. So to the fun stuff. Disinformation here quickly is an example of a fake post. So it actually said there was a car bomb that occurred on a military base in the border of Colombia and Venezuela. And this car bomb did occur, but this account said that it did not occur. And it also, if you see right there, it mentioned Russia's Spanish language news outlet, Actualidad RT, and Gustavo Petro in order to get that narrative out. Another example of fake information is that during the anti-government protests, the anti-riot police in Colombia took out their tank. It said it ran over protesters. Associated Press looked into this, and so did others, and found that that did not occur. That was not true. Okay? And now, that was an example of the fake stuff. Now it's meddling in the actual elections and the political process in Colombia. So Gustavo Petro had wanted, he asked supporters to spread information about 5 million votes in order to get Congress to be in favor of his political, policies. Just like Congress here, you want the majority. So Chalecos, of course, is like, yes, Petro, we got you. And they made a hashtag, or they participated in the hashtag 5 million votes, and then mentioned several Twitter accounts that had characteristics that were basically the same, and including like creation date, and certain names. Like out here you'll see one that says Ortega. Ortega is the last name of the Nicaraguan president who is considered a dictator, and the Ortega team, so there you go. And we looked at this in November 2021. We're like, oh, that's interesting. It's using the domestic hashtags in Colombia in order to get Congress to change. That's important. But then we looked again in February 2022, and all these accounts were suspended for inauthentic behavior. So it knowingly asked its audience, its followers, to follow these inauthentic accounts, which, again, not nice. Not nice for your audience to fool them. And I mentioned different characteristics. One of those characteristics were, so true Petro supporters use, so Petro put out something about the economy, a tweet, and he mentioned avocado and bees. So supporters started using those emojis in their profiles, and so did the inauthentic accounts. So here is the example of that. And here are true supporters also using the avocado and bee emojis. So they were trying to look authentic, but they were not. And there were other characteristics that I can elaborate on that led us to believe these were inauthentic as well. So now this other part of the network, this account engaged with, retweeted, @mentioned, again, Venezuelan state news, Russian state news, Iranian state news, and Cuba state news. And here are some examples of that. So all the way on the left, you'll see Redfish and RT mentioned. And then even as recent as June, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, went to Iran and went to Hispan TV facilities. That's her Spanish language news outlet. And on top of all that, RT and Venezuela do have media partnerships, so it makes sense that they would echo their perspective on matters of global issues. So now to the really fun part, and this was our favorite part, was finding out who was behind this account, okay? OSINT rule number 1, follow the clues, so we did. We looked at Chaleco's Telegram channel that it links right in its bio, and it led us to the Telegram channel, so we were looking around and saw that an entity named Realito Digital was the admin. And Realito Digital also mentioned somebody, or reposts somebody whose screen name was Raid Noor. So we love names, so we went with it. And turns out Realito Digital was suspended from Twitter twice, and there's also Venezuela listed. So check mark number 1, now we can say that this account is likely linked to an entity in Venezuela. And it said, this is Archive Wayback Machine gave us this information. Political marketing. So political marketing is using commercial marketing techniques to promote a candidate or an idea and gain the trust of the audience or its target audience. And you know, if you're doing political marketing, I would assume the news you're spreading might not be quite objective. So there you go. And it also references Chalecos Amarillo in the bio. So there we go, check mark number 2. It made a reference to our account of interest. And then we got another name. We love names. So Raid Noor, turns out, was a gentleman named Rafael Nunez. And Rafael Nunez has really bad OPSEC. So he also puts political marketing in his bio. He was super easy to find on social media because he's involved in marketing, right? So thank you. And he has an Instagram account that showed him meeting with Venezuela's telecommunication firm, like leaders in that organization. So that's his friend, Daniel. I forgot his last name at the moment, but we have a report out. If you want more details, feel free to find that, and we'll provide that for you. But yeah, so really, really interesting stuff. So we're getting closer and closer to the real, reason why this account is operating the way it is, and finding out why. And then one key thing we found was who is paying Rafael Nunez, most likely. So we found his LinkedIn, and he associates himself with Digital Communication VE, Comunicación Digital VE in Spanish. Up there you'll see his cover photo. Again, thank you for the bad OPSEC. Has the logo for that, and also Realito Digital. So there you go, the trio, Rafael Núñez. So now we know that Chaleco's Telegram channel, its admin is Realito Digital, which is Rafael Núñez, the community manager for Digital Communication VE. So we got our next name because we followed the clues. Digital Communication VE, its CEO is Jason Rosseo. Who is Jason? Jason is CEO, and Digital Comunicación Digital VE does strategic and intelligent digital marketing, again, marketing. And he's also, interestingly, the former director of social media for Venezuela's Ministry of Communications and Information, so the MINSI. And he retired in 2016, but through clever OSINT work and third-party tools, we found that he has an active government email with the National Institute for Socialist Training and Education. So that is Jason. So Jason also has bad OPSEC. And he has several social media accounts. This is his personal Twitter account, and you'll see that its followers are really high-level officials in the Venezuelan government. Diosdado Cabello and George Arriaza, they've been around since Hugo Chavez's time. So very interesting to see them being actual followers because just some random business owner that was a government worker. But I guess that could be, so again, that necessarily wasn't it was a strong connection, but we wanted more, and we got that. And our report didn't cover this, but when I went back to prepare for this presentation, I saw that the Facebook page, thank you Facebook for the page transparency. It's super important for people to understand where they're getting their information from, but it also helps us OSINT analysts find more information and follow clues. So this page was actually created, this is a company that Jason is CEO of, in 2009. That was a very long time ago, even though it doesn't feel like it. And the name of the page at the time was Periódico Patria Grande, which translates to Great Homeland Newspaper. And it did have an address, a URL, and its URL was registered by the MINSI. So it paid for that, for its website. So we already know that Periódico Patria Grande now, its website is linked to the MINSI. And when you do open source research on the newspaper itself, it's actually, according to different news sources, it was a university-led media effort to counter US narratives on global issues. And it even included contributors with this, again, thank you Wayback Machine for this, because the website wasn't working well. Contributors were Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez. When you have presidents contributing to a university effort, like a media effort, that's really weird. So here we find the connection to the actual government. There we go. That's Nicolás Maduro. So what happened? Petro was elected as Colombia's next president, and I'm not saying Chalecos should take all the credit for that, but Chalecos was certainly a factor in framing the narrative in the country. We already saw that it did infiltrate discussions coming out of Colombia on politically sensitive topics. So, yeah, congratulations. And then 2 weeks later, so 2 weeks later, I don't know if many of you know this, but after he won, this was announced that there was going to be war games in the Western Hemisphere hosted in Venezuela with Iranian, Chinese, and Russian military presence. So normally, because Venezuela and Colombia do share a border, they're neighbors, a Colombian administration that is more on the, on the same level ideologically as the United States would express concern over this. It's less likely with Petro as president now. And this is the first time these war games are hosted in the Western Hemisphere. It's normally in Eastern Europe. There we are. Oh, and this is the Cuban president in the bottom left, Díaz-Canel. So post-report behaviors. Our publication published in March 2022 This account was suspended in March 2022, but 2 weeks before our account, our report went out. It wasn't our doing, by the way. So Twitter finally took it down, suspended the account after it started posting disinformation about Ukraine and echoing Russia's perspective on the matter. So at least it was taken down. But again, it was able to operate since 2018. So, okay. Oops. One moment. So some characteristics we noticed. It was less active, way less active. It also pinned the Telegram channel up to the top of its profile, so where it's more freely able to share news that is inaccurate. And so, yeah, I mean, just ISIS did this too, by the way. Once social media platforms started taking down their accounts, they're like, hey, find us on this encrypted platform instead. Here you go. Follow the path. And now, though, it's labeled as media. This is a new account. It kept the brand, by the way. Chalecos Amar dropped a couple letters, but people could still find it easy if they followed it before. It conducts media news, but its operators do political marketing. It's not media, at least it could be, but it's not objective. But people, again, it will gain the trust of the people and perceive it as authentic media news. So in the Telegram channel, the actors did acknowledge our research twice. So on Twitter, it posted, it said, this is, you know, they talk about us even when they suspend us. They were laughing about it. And then in May, again, they actually posted our report to their Telegram channel, which is great exposure. And they think we were responsible, or Ralito and his team thinks we were responsible for their suspension, when in fact they dug their own hole once they said the word Ukraine. So. And Cyberscoop did cover our story back around that time, and thankfully it did make its rounds with investigative journalists in the region, so we did get exposure down in South America. So it's really important for people to understand what they're reading and why they're, you know, the source of their information. So at least we appreciate that. So some general key takeaways. Do not trust sources you do not know. Sources of information reveal motives, and it'll help you come in front of information operations instead of being responsive once it's already occurred. Digital actors engaged in I/O adapt. Again, you saw Twitter suspended it, but now it pinned its Telegram channel to the top so people can just follow it and read all the craziness that happens in that Telegram channel. And next time, it could be different too. We kept seeing the word marketing, and this is political marketing, okay? So there is a request that comes in from an entity, Venezuelan government, we believe. Research is conducted. The planning takes place, the operation, review, and then a new request. And again, content is important, but it should not be the only thing you look at when looking at disinformation, because guess what? Academics are studying how people fact-check their information, and that can get into the wrong hands and further manipulate everything. What do I mean? Here's an example of that. So this is a Russian study on how people check information. This is on a Russian population. But they do recommend that people research this further. Again, not necessarily malicious, but it could be used for malicious reasons in the future, the findings that come from this. So OSINT key takeaways: be suspicious of accounts with no identifiable info, follow the clues, and historic data often provides really good leads. But most importantly, the last 2 points, which are not often discussed, we had complete political neutrality no matter what our beliefs was, because otherwise our biases would probably influence the direction our investigation would take. So we just let the research guide the research. And it's important to do that as an OSINT analyst as well, in general. And then be supportive of your team. As an OSINT analyst, we come across a lot of disturbing content, and it's important for teammates to be there for one another and get the help if they might need it. So with that, I'll finish my brief, and thank you so much for your time and for coming today.